This is Ann Peterson, and we're talking about psychology and safety today. So, when you start looking at it, why would psychology end up with something like safety? Well, essentially, as a person who works in a safety profession, you do need to make sure that you're looking at some of the stresses that your job employees are under. Now, these could be a lot of different factors that you're looking at. Maybe there's like a job satisfaction. If people aren't satisfied with their job, they're probably not going to really care if something happens or not. Um, Also, too, the attitudes, if they just don't have very good attitudes about safety, if they think that it's just a no-show type thing or just something that the company says, it's not something that the company does, that causes some problems. And then obviously, if you have some type of loss or workplace violent situation that happens, that causes a lot of stress among everybody there. Now, it is something that you do need to make sure that you're paying attention to due to the fact that most of the accidents, as we discussed earlier, are the result of something that's happened with regard to human behaviors or human errors. So let's look at the basic terminology when we look at this. The first one is going to be psychology, which is simply the study of behavior. The next one is going to be attitudes, and it's just your reactions toward everything that's going on. And this could be people, places, objects, all of that. Now, these beliefs and feelings, these are things that each person has and they're individual. And a lot of times the attitudes circumvent a lot of issues with regard to employees. The next one is job satisfaction, and that's just how people feel about the job. Do they like the job? Do they not like the job? You know, what is their satisfaction? And that obviously can change from moment to moment, day to day. The next is morale, and this is actually just meeting individuals' needs and looking to see what the needs are from that come from the jobs, and this says form, but from the jobs. And then the motivation is going to be the inner drive. What motivates a person? Now, there's two types of motivation, the intrinsic and extrinsic. And the intrinsic is something that's internally, the extrinsic is something that's external. So when we look at motivation, I guess the question we need to ask, do we as people and do you do things just because you know it's the right thing to do? And, sometimes we can say yes and sometimes we can say no. I mean, each of us probably have driven over the speed limit. We've probably rolled through a stop sign. We've probably lied to someone probably within the last, couple of days or something like that. So even though we know it's the right thing to do, a lot of times we don't do that, and that's just human nature. So what can we do with regard to employees, and how can we make them work safely? And that's where it gets to be some type of an issue. Now, motivation comes in a lot of different forms for different people. And go ahead and watch this YouTube video and then come back on the PowerPoint slide. So motivation, when we start looking at it, obviously this is, some type of feeling or action in a given situation. Now, we can be poorly motivated or we can be very well motivated. It just kind of depends. But people can't really motivate others. They have to do it themselves. And so when you look um, at the fact of what type of motivation, and it kind of based on personal experience that you've had in the past, and you start forming some attitudes. If your attitude's good, it may be a form of motivation for you too. So what we'd need to do is actually understand motivation and human behavior and how it actually goes together. And this was something that I pulled out because some of us start looking at it. And I know a lot of companies are really looking at motivation and how people are motivated in their job to try to make better employees. So some statistics that I had was 70% of your employees are less motivated today than they used to be. And this can be from a number of factors. It can be internally or externally. And then 80% of your employees could perform significantly better if they desired. And then 50% of your employees only put enough effort in to keep their jobs. And if you just kind of put this in a concept with regard to maybe schoolwork or going to college, And a lot of students just only put about what they have to do to get the grade so that they only have to worry about it. Other than that, they're not going to go any further. And a lot of students, and I can see that a lot of students could probably put in a little bit more effort and do just, better. But that's just something that some students just don't do. Now, some students are very motivated, and you can tell that by the things that they turn in and the timing and everything else. But it's just very interesting to see that, and that just kind of puts it into perspective for you. It could be in anything, in a job, it could be at schoolwork, it could be, at home, it could be anything. So what we have to do is we have to look at some motivational perspectives, and we're actually going to look at several of these. Now these are really important, and I do want you to make sure that you're noting what these are, because they will be on the test, and they will be on a final too. So you do need to make sure that you're understanding what these theories are, and just a little bit about them. Now, when we start looking at Maslow's theory, and you've probably heard this before, it's a needs hierarchy theory. And pretty much what Maslow said was that people all, once they have their basic needs, they advance up the scale once those needs are met. So you see the first one down here is survival, and the second, safety and security, social belonging, and then self-esteem, and then finally self-actualization. And if you think about it, maybe just in the tornado setting, because that was something real dear to me, and worked several days over there. At the very beginning, survival was it, and that's all that everybody was trying to do over there, is just survive. They had lost everything, and people started coming in and giving food and water, and the electricity didn't get turned on for like a week or so, and they didn't have a way to communicate because of their cell phones being lost. And so once they got that, then they could start feeling a little bit more, that they were doing a little bit more. Then once they felt that they were safe and secure, because there was quite a few people that were coming through looting at the very beginning, and so they had several police, like cordon off the area and make sure that people couldn't go in and out of the tornado area. Um, and so they were really making sure that everything was safe and secure. Plus, too, once they contacted their insurance companies and they knew that they were okay and that they could rebuild, it probably gave them a sense of what I want to say, sense of relief. So then what they started doing is, obviously, friends and families and coworkers, everybody started coming in, Convoy of Hope, Samaritan's Purse, a lot of the churches, and they just started helping, and they felt like they weren't alone, and so that really helped them out. And then obviously, so you can just see how they're moving up the hierarchy of needs here, but that's just an example of that. And we look at McClellan's theory. This is actually a needs achievement theory, and it's based on three different motives with regard to driving human behavior. The first one is achievement. If a person actually feels that they're accomplishing tasks and activities, and they're actually doing this, and they're making sure that everything's getting done, that's achievement. The next one is affiliation, and this has to do with company of others. The people they work with, the people they have in their relationships, and this could be in work and out of work as well. The next one is going to be power. If you don't look at this as control, it's just influencing others. And so McClellan's is a three essential motives to drive human behavior: achievement, affiliation, and power. Now, Herzberg's motivation hygiene theory actually works on some factors with regard to job satisfaction. And so, what it's looking at is, where's the job satisfaction and how can we make that higher? So, it looks at different levels, 6 of them: activity, and this is actually a person, working and being able to perform their duties. If you put it in a work setting, authority kind of looks like the one we just looked at, the power to influence or control work activities, kind of giving the people, the employees, a right to say, okay, yes, I can do this or I can change this, and feeling like they can do that. Creativity kind of falls right into that as well. Maybe you ask your employees, what's wrong with this area, and they'll tell you. And if they actually tell you and you follow through on that, it'll definitely make them feel a little bit more important, which is the next one. And so they do feel like, since they had a part in creating it, that they had a little bit of authority, which is the power to influence, and they makes them feel a little bit more important. And then it falls into, interest. So they start looking at, feeling like it's an ownership, and job satisfaction falls into that too. And so all of these fall into that, and that's the reason why we're looking at it. Now, the problem with this is that sometimes people do feel, real tired of everything. I'm so tired of this place. I'm so tired of the things that happen around here. Things like that you'll hear. Boring, doing the same thing over and over. Sometimes that doesn't work. Stress is obviously a problem, and then people not feeling like they're useful around there. Now, some positives, and this is a big term that you'll hear in a lot of companies, is part of the whole. And what that actually means is part of the whole company, and it's not just like one sector of it, but it's a whole thing. And when I worked at Blitz, we actually had this terminology, and if you were part of the whole, that means that everything that everybody did throughout the whole company made a difference. And so they ended up going to no organizational charts, and so everybody was pretty much on the same level, whether you were a worker on the floor, the safety manager, or you were the CEO. We were all kind of straight across in a straight line. Now this works okay, but as I said, it kind of gets to be okay. Well, where do you go if you have to find something? So there are some flaws with this, but there's flaws with all of these theories as well. Okay, the next one is the behavior theory, and this is Pavlov that we talk about. And essentially, what he did is an experiment that he looked at a dog, and the dog was like salivating when they put food out there. And this was just something that the dog just does. I mean, you do the same thing. You put a burger and french fries in front of you, and you probably salivate and hurry up and try to eat it too. So, what he did is he actually rang a tuning fork. And when he did this tuning fork, the dog didn't do anything because he didn't know. So they ended up putting the tuning fork and the food together, rang the tuning fork, and the dog started salivating because obviously the food was there. So then, after he did this several times, the dog started associating every time I hear that tuning fork, it means I must be getting fed. And so it ends up being a conditioned or learned response. And so when you start looking at this is kind of behavior and reflexive, if I could talk, in nature. Now, when you start thinking about if there's an accident or something like that, and somebody's been hurt, normally what happens is people start feeling real anxious, and they're very, very safe for a short amount of time. And if you think about it too, if you have had a speeding ticket lately, or if you've almost gotten caught with regard to speeding, typically when you drive off, you're not driving your 65 miles an hour in a 55 zone. You're driving 55 or 54 or 53. And so what we've learned is, okay, you need to make sure you do this. But after a while, it just kind of turns into, you know, driving back at 65 miles an hour in a 50. So there's once again, that's one of the flaws with this, but they are one of the good theories of it. The next one's going to be the behavior theory, and this is the motivation with regard to Skinner. And actually, what he did is he put an electric grid and a food dispenser out there and a water dispenser with a little lever. And what he did is pretty much conditioned the mouse to understand, if I push this lever, then I'm going to get some water. If I push this lever, I'm going to get some food. And so, it goes into a lot of different things, but essentially it's the consequences of people's actions will determine future actions. And so when we look at the positive reinforcement, sometimes, and it kind of depends on how this works out, but praise and recognition and money and those things, those are some positive reinforcements. And then, of course, punishment. If you obviously are punished, if you've had an accident, you're not going to feel very good about it because you hurt yourself even though you were doing something you weren't supposed to. And so it kind of looks a lot at this, and we talk a little bit about incentive programs with regard to this, and a lot of people use that. Do they work or do they not? I'm not sure. So safety culture, when we start looking at this, we really need to make sure that we're able to see what people are motivated by and how we are going to get the information across. Now, some companies, they just post a lot of safety slogans around. very interesting is that we used to have these floor mats. They were, to like carpets, and a company would come in and they'd actually put these down, and we would put a saying on there, and he would change them out once every month. And so it was very interesting. We wanted to see if people were actually looking at these mats or not. And so we had kind of like a quiz in our safety meeting. And I asked, well, what does the mat, when everybody walks in the front door, what does it say? And we had two main entrances, actually three main entrances to Blitz, and one of them was the main door, which the majority of the employees went in because they had to clock in. And obviously there was one at each door, and it's very interesting because not that many people actually knew what that mat said. And so, do they work? Do they not? I don't know. It just kind of depends. Also, too, you hear about toolbox meetings or tailgate meetings with regard to safety, and does that really help? We used to have safety meetings, that type of thing, or maybe putting information in the checks. Do people really even look at their checks or their pay stubs anymore? Most people have stuff direct deposited, so I'm not sure if that's actually something that works or not. But you do have to figure out something, and it may be something that you move around and keep changing over and over because you just want to keep interest in safety, and you got to be really consistent with regard to this. Now, when you start looking at education and the culture and how this all kind of fits in, your safety culture has a lot to do with it. It does have a lot to do with management, obviously, and how management feels about safety and how they actually project safety. And so you do have to look at what is the value and what are the ethics. So what is actually important, and then what do we actually think is the right thing to do, and trying to get this all under control and control things where it's down at a near miss, or even hopefully even before that, where it just doesn't happen. So let's talk a little bit about incentives when we look at this. Now, incentives are an external reinforcement or external motivation, and this is not where we should be, especially if you look at behavior-based safety and that type of thing. People just need to do the right thing because they actually did, and this is more inherent. And so how we need to do this is see how we can help people work safely. Now, it was very interesting because we used to have a safety program at both places that I worked. At one company at one time, they actually gave out $100 bills on a day, and they would walk around, and this would be every quarter that we'd walk around. And the very first time that I was there and had to walk around, people were like, "What's this for?" And it's like, we'd hand it to them and said, "Thank you for being safe." And it was a person who didn't have an accident in that quarter, in that 3-month period. And by their actions or by their words saying, "What's this for?" Was it really working or wasn't it? And so that was one of the things that we had to look at. So some of the things that happen with regard to incentives is that people don't report. It's something that they don't do. And there's some competition that kind of lies in this. Well, I'm going to get this, or, our department's going to be better than your department, that kind of thing. And you'll see companies do that with the people with the most most near miss reports or something like that. They actually get a pizza party, or you see incentives like that. So what you want to do is make sure that when you do this, that it's kept really clean. And I know that's kind of hard, and it's a little bit hard to explain, but people misreport, or people don't report at all if it's an accident, just so they don't lose the safety incentives. So somehow you have to look at, empowerment, and empowerment's a really big word, and job enrichment is too. Making sure that everybody shares in the success versus just one or two people. Now, when you start looking at near misses, and this is something that really should be looked at the very beginning of everything, is these don't result in accidents. It's something that could have happened, and that's what actually a near miss is. It's under first aid, and so you don't have any type of first aid that has to be done, but it is something that's just a near miss. And so people, a lot of times, if they recognize that they can do something about it before someone gets hurt, then that's kind of in the proactive stage, versus to when you start getting into the first aid area or in a major accident or maybe like a death, you're getting into reactive. It's after the fact. So somehow you have to make sure that people are looking at the behaviors at the very beginning that could be risky and then the near misses that happen so that somehow you're logging those. The problem is nobody reports them. And a lot of times people don't even recognize them, but it is something to educate your employees on. So the cost. This is where we start getting into, how much does it cost for a workplace accident? Now, most of the things, there's two different types of costs. The first one's going to be a direct cost, and the next one's going to be an indirect cost. Now, your direct costs are going to be the things that you see. It's going to be the medical bills. It's going to be maybe an increase in workers' comp insurance premiums. It's maybe maybe you got fined for it from OSHA, something like that. But then you start looking at the indirect costs, which really add up. People taking off time to do the accident investigation. Maybe you have to hire someone or train somebody's replacement, which takes quite a bit. The repair, which should have already been done, but the repair obviously when an accident happens, something happens with the machine or any type of equipment, and that's something that needs to be done. Lost productivity. People feel really bad when something happens and they're not up to speed, so the morale is really down. And then, of course, there's a lot of administrative costs. And then if you think when you have an accident, obviously your reputation as a company is going to get around, especially if it's a death. And people a lot of times don't think of that, how many people won't purchase from this company because of something that happened. So it's kind of an interesting fact that it has on here, on average, for every $1 of direct costs of an accident, a company will spend an additional 4 in indirect costs. So it's quite a bit, actually. It adds up quick. Okay, so what we're kind of getting to is that everyone in the company actually needs to work together with regard to safety. This can't be just one person's job. And a lot of times people think that it is the job of the person who is actually in the safety position, or it could be the person who's the supervisor. And a lot of times they think that's their job to keep everyone safe. And that's not true. Everyone does need to work together. It takes every person in the company, not just one, or otherwise it's just really not going to work out. Now, the challenge is supervisors, managers, owners, safety managers, whatever. You actually have to realize, that we have to look at the employees' value of things, and we have to make sure that they're doing things the right way versus not doing it. Because as we've discussed before, the most of the accidents have come from human error or employee error. So this is why we kind of talk a little bit about psychology. I didn't want to get too deep into it, but wanted to just kind of mention it. And there's a short video on here for you to watch as well. Thank you.